Whether you're a self-taught musician, have a teacher, or you're already a professional, this show is meant to help you with knowledge, mindset, craft, and strategies to improve your overall musicianship so that you can become the best musician you can be, regardless of your goals. Welcome to Musicianship Mastery. Hello and welcome to Musicianship Mastery, episode number 112. My name is David Lane, and it is great to be with you once again. So I'm excited today to share with you a topic that we first brought up in episode number 1 that has not come up in detail until now here on episode number 112. Again, back on episode 1, through episode 100, this podcast was known as the Musician Toolkit. In that episode, episode 1, I shared 20 tools of musicianship that I suggested that if you were to get better, even a little bit, at all 20 of these tools, you would exponentially become a much better musician. And later on, I added a 21st tool on an episode about listening, and that being the tool of how to listen analytically. And of those 21 tools, at some point long before this episode, we have covered 20 of them. The one that we have not covered at all is the one that we're going to do a deep dive into today, and that is the tool of being able to follow other musicians, also known as being a collaborative musician, also known as being an accompanist. And while I've had a lot of personal experience in this area, I wanted to talk to someone who not only also has a lot of personal experience in this area, but also has advanced degrees specializing in this particular type of musicianship, as well as a business coaching other musicians how to do this. Now, to be upfront, I'm a pianist. My guest is a pianist. We will be talking about this probably specifically to pianists. But if you're in a chamber ensemble, for example, like if you're in a string quartet, woodwind quartet or quintet, or a brass quintet, or any other combination, maybe 4, 6, 7 players, you have to get into double-digit players before it justifies having a conductor. You should be able to play with other musicians in various settings by listening, by using the same reflexes and skills that accompanists develop, whether you're on a piano or another instrument. So I hope that if you don't play piano, that you'll listen to this episode and apply the same advice, apply the same information to your own instrument, because it absolutely is useful no matter what instrument you play. So let me tell you about my guest today. Her name is Dr. Rachel Ehring. She is a pianist, teacher, and fellow podcaster. We'll talk more about her podcast in just a moment, who lives in Orange County, California. She has a Master of Music from the University of Kansas in piano accompanying, and a Doctorate of Musical Arts from the University of Colorado at Boulder in collaborative piano. And we're going to talk about the specific skills that you need to have, even if you're pretty comfortable on your instrument already, what you need to do to be able to follow other musicians. Sometimes understanding that that actually involves being a leader as well as a follower. There's a bit of a give and take, and so much more that goes into being a good accompanist. And I think this is a conversation full of a lot of helpful information. I hope that you enjoyed as much as I enjoyed having it. Here's my conversation with Dr. Rachel Ehring. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So you are a fellow podcaster. In fact, you, like me, have 2 podcasts. So I have Life in the Pit for theater musicians, along with Musicianship Mastery, this one. And you have 2 podcasts. Tell us a little bit about each of them.
Sure. So I started the Dynamic Piano Teaching podcast, I think it was almost 2 years ago now. And I did that for maybe 6 or 8 months. And then Tim Topham with Top Music asked me if I wanted to do a podcast for them. And so we started the Top Music Piano podcast. So I pretty much put my dynamic piano teaching podcast on pause because there was a lot of overlap with audience and topics and all of that. And because, as you know, doing a podcast is a lot of work. And so managing one was plenty for me at this stage in life. So right now I'm just doing the Top Music Piano podcast.
I thoroughly understand that. Both my other podcast exists, and it'll have its second episode this year, but that's two more than it had last year.
Nice.
Very hard to keep both going, so you're either kind of middling with both or you're focusing your energy on one,
Right.
unless you've got like a nice team of assistants, which I think we're probably both solopreneurs when it comes to that type of thing. But
Yeah, I mean, I do work with Tim's team now. I
right.
work with Top Music, which is amazing, not having to do all of the editing and everything myself. But when I had my own podcast, I was definitely doing everything all on my own.
So how did you connect with Tim?
We actually met at NCKP in 2023, and my podcast was pretty new. I'd been listening to his podcast for years and was a big fan. And on the last day, I got up the courage to go up and introduce myself to him and gave him my card and kind of I guess sheepishly told him like, yeah, I just started this little podcast, and he was about to release his book, No Book Beginners. And he said, well, if you'd like me to come on your podcast and share about the book when it comes out, I would be happy to. And I was like flabbergasted. I was like, yes, that'd be amazing. I would love that. And so he kept my card. I guess he listened to some of the podcasts. He came on my show. And after we finished the interview, he said, I would love to have you host a podcast for us. And so that's how it all happened. It was it was very surprising. I was not expecting that at the end of that interview by any means.
Well, I know that's a fun opportunity. I have listened to, I don't get a chance to listen as many podcasts as I want. I have listened to an episode you did with our mutual friend, Andrea Miller.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, she's great.
yes, and she's appeared on this podcast as well. And so the original premise of this podcast, it was originally called the Musician Toolkit, and I started off with a list of 20 tools, eventually added a 21st, and that got a little bit bloated. We changed it to Musicianship Mastery. But there was one tool in the musician toolkit that I never really covered, and I want to make sure that we go ahead and do that now, and that is the ability to follow other musicians. So I've talked about the leadership side. You should be able to lead a rehearsal, but you also need to be in situations where if other musicians are playing, you can follow along. And I don't mean necessarily follow a conductor, but
Hmm.
follow without a conductor. And that brings us to the first question of the day. What do we call what we're talking about? Is it being an accompanist? Is it being a collaborative musician, or does it even matter?
Well, to me, if I'm being honest, it doesn't matter, which I know is a little controversial. I understand where the term collaborative pianist or collaborative musician comes from. It comes from the desire for accompanists, which is what they were previously called, to be put on an equal plane with the rest of the musicians, with the soloists or whoever they're playing with, which makes perfect sense. And I totally support that. I have found that, first of all, nobody knows what a collaborative pianist is. And so I always have to explain what it is. Um, and then, secondly, I found that really it's so much more important to show up and do an amazing job, and people are going to respect you as a collaborator. And it doesn't really matter what they call you. If you show up and do an amazing job following, like you're talking about, and playing musically and all of those things that we can get into, you're going to gain the respect of your peers.
Perhaps it's my training as a film composer that gives me this mentality, but there's a similarity between scoring a film and being an accompanist or a collaborative pianist, and that is people really most people only notice if you do a poor job.
Yeah, true.
If you're doing a great job, they don't notice you at all because, like in the case of a film score, that they are really impressed with the film. They didn't really notice the music. And in the case of who you're collaborating with, they really noticed that musician, and the whole performance was satisfying. So, but I guess that's up to each pianist, who's
Hmm.
doing this. And I should specify this: this is not a piano centered podcast, but we do have a lot of pianists that listen to it, and one of the skills is uh, from the original podcast is keyboard skills, being able to play the piano. So we end up getting a bit of overlap when we talk about this. So
Sure.
so I guess just for the sake of anybody who really cares about it, we'll just say either term might pop up during the interview.
Yeah.
uh, I'm comfortable with accompanist, but I respect that some people prefer a collaborative musician or collaborative pianist.
Yeah.
Um, so I took this totally from your Instagram page. I was looking at it, and one of your fairly recent posts was titled Five Reasons for Accompanying. So I thought that'd be a good place for us to start. Um, and I'll just list them one by one, and you can tell me your thoughts on it. So the first one is it makes you a better musician.
Absolutely. Okay, first of all, if you're collaborating with a musician who is better than you are, it will absolutely, you'll have to raise your level. It also gives you different skills, and we'll talk about some of these skills, like learning how to listen differently, learning how to balance in a certain way. You're going to improve your rhythmic skills for sure. You cannot be an accompanist and have bad rhythm. You just, you won't get asked back, right? It'll improve. I think this is on the list, but sight reading. There's just so many skills that you're going to improve, and it is going to make you a better musician. But I think whether you're playing with someone, honestly, whether you're playing with someone who is above your level or below your level, both of those have their challenges, and both of those can really stretch you as a musician.
Yeah, that's true. Um, Yeah, I have felt the pressure when I have been around a truly confident like vocalist, for example.
Hmm.
You know, whereas, I kind of feel I don't know, when I'm around someone who's a little more timid, I feel like I can kind of flex a little bit of leadership and be a little more steady, but when you've got a vocalist who's very confident and they don't mind the tempo swaying a little bit and just taking their time, you have to really tune in, and yeah, you do grow in those moments. So the second reason for being an accompanist or collaborative pianist is that it exposes you to all kinds of genres that you might have not explored before. So what are some of those genres?
Well, I mean, it really could be anything. But one of the things about being an accompanist is you often don't get to choose the repertoire that you're going to play. And let me tell you, I have played probably hundreds of pieces that I would not have chosen for whatever reason. Um, I have really small hands, and sometimes, I'll be handed a work that is tenths all over the page. And I'm like, oh boy, I never would have chosen this, but I have to learn it. I have to figure out how to make it work. I'm not particularly keen on 20th century music. I mean, some of it I like, but some of it I would not choose to play. But if I'm handed that piece of music, I'm going to learn it. And I might even grow to like it a little bit. You never know. So it could be anything. I mean, maybe you've never played musical theater and you're accompanying a singer who wants to do some musical theater, or some opera. Maybe you've never done opera and they want to do an opera aria. So it really could be anything, but just being adaptable and open to playing whatever is handed to you, I think is a skill that accompanists have to have and grow into, I guess.
Um, It's something that didn't really it didn't even pop into my head when we started this conversation, when I was kind of preparing my notes for it, is there's a wide range of, I guess, level of difficulty depending on what kind of accompaniment you're doing.
Hmm.
If you're doing, say, there's the G. Shermer book, Italian Arias, that I think you can't go through college without having played if you are an accompanist in college. And I'd say for the most part, for any pianist who's on the level to be in college, who's a music major, not going to be, shouldn't be too challenging. But when you are accompanying instrumentalists, very often you are playing not the piano accompaniment, you are playing the orchestral reduction for
Hmm.
concerto. So I don't know what your first nightmare story is, but mine was Carl Nielsen Flute Concerto, the
Mm.
accompaniment for that. It's like, that's the first time my eyes just went really wide, and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to play this and have it sound good. And that was probably the hardest thing that I think I played on piano the entire 4 years I was in undergrad school. Do you have a piece, not necessarily that like you dislike the experience, but it really caused a little stress at the time?
Oh, yeah. Um, this actually wasn't an orchestral reduction. It was written for piano. The
Hmm.
Hindemith Tuba Sonata. Hindemith is known for writing challenging piano parts, and the instrumental parts are difficult as well. But the tuba sonata, the last movement, oh my goodness, the tuba is just holding these long notes, and the piano has 16th notes for like 4 pages, and they're almost scales, but not quite. And the tuba player wants to go fast because they're having to hold these long notes and do these long phrases. And I did not want to go fast for obvious reasons. And I mean, honestly, when I had to perform it, I think I just mashed down the pedal and played notes for 4 pages and hoped we got to the end at the same moment. It was not my most stellar performance.
There are some memes out there that I have seen about, pianists and other people playing Hindemith, and it's basically the pianist is running away.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
Um, so I can definitely speak to this third reason for accompanying, and that is that it improves your sight reading. In fact, I would say it improves your sight reading, and it also gives you an assessment on your sight reading, is where I would say. This is something I have said many times on my podcast. Um, I got to college unaware of how deficient I was in sight reading. And the first time I had to accompany someone in a lesson is when I realized how deficient I was, because I wasn't expecting that I was going to come in on week 4 and for them and see the music for the first time. And so thankfully I had a teacher help me with sight reading, and I also did some exercises over a couple of summers to become at least what I would say is at par or an average sight reader. And I've been able to work, since then. But once you kind of address that deficiency, most of what you do is sight reading. I don't know that, it's a blessing, I guess, if you can get who you're accompanying to give you the music in advance.
Yes. Yeah, for some reason, people just assume that accompanists can sight read. And so we're always asked to do it, for better or worse. We're asked to do it. And yeah, I mean, I've been in so many situations, whether it's a choir rehearsal, and you're not always just sight reading, in front of one person. You might be sight reading in front of a whole choir of people, or in I don't know, a pit for a musical theater rehearsal, or who knows? Like, there's so many different scenarios where I've been asked to sight read, even in a performance, like a master class I played for. There was a really well-known euphonium professor who was doing a master class, and at the end, he just handed me a piece of music and was like, "Can we play this together?" And I was like, "Okay, we will play this together," and we did.
I feel like attitude is everything. If you just smile during those situations, it'll go a lot better than if you panic. Um,
Yes, for
and I
sure.
will speak. So this episode, we're recording it uh, definitely a few weeks before it's going to come out. So that, but as of this conversation, I'm about 20 hours away from playing for theater auditions for the next show that
Mm,
I'm music directing. And I was asked, do I need an accompanist, or will I do the accompanying? And I always just say, mainly for the interest, I guess, of saving money for the budget. They don't have to go pay another company. So I said, of course, I'll do it. But that just means that I'll be playing all the things that I don't know what it is until we get there. And, just for fun, it is an audition scenario. So I don't want to be the reason that
yeah.
they get the role. So again, a little bit of added pressure right there. But of course, um, I'm also the music director, so I can tell the director that was my fault if something happens there. But yeah, that was something I talked about on Life in the Pit. I talked to someone who has done the SETC auditions for decades, and it's specifically it's the pro auditions is they're trying to get professional work, and he's talked about, he's done so many, he doesn't feel the pressure that much, but it's still, yeah, it's still tricky. But yeah, because you don't get the music that often in advance, you do get a chance to improve your sight reading. But first time you do it, it's a good chance to see where are you, what needs work as far as sight reading goes.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so yeah, talk about this next one. The fourth reason it makes you a better performer.
Yeah. So my experience is, and I'm sure this isn't true for everyone, but if you're a solo performer, a solo pianist, you're probably going to perform maybe a couple times a year, unless you're like a really high level. But, if you're in college, you'll do a jury one semester, maybe a recital the next semester, something like that. But if you're a collaborative pianist, you're going to be on the stage a lot. Like once you start doing this, I mean, when I was a full-time staff pianist, I might be performing 6, 10 times a week.
Mhm.
Like you're gonna get better at performing, you're gonna get more comfortable on stage, and you're gonna get more comfortable in all kinds of different performing scenarios the more you do it.
Absolutely. And the fifth reason for being accompanist is it's fun and you will probably make new friends.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, as pianists, we sit in the practice room by ourselves for years and years. And then finally, I got to get out of the practice room and meet some people and make some new friends. I mean, I've made some amazing friends that I've accompanied singers, instrumentalists, choir people who I'm still friends with that I met through collaborative piano.
That's true. And uh, being a collaborative pianist, it could be that you're collaborating one person, but you're accompanying one person, but you could be accompanying again an entire ensemble, or in musical theater an entire production. So yeah, the possibilities are quite diverse as far as your experience out there.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing. I have gotten to travel literally around the world because of being an accompanist. Many of the choirs that I've accompanied have traveled to Europe. I've been to Australia with accompanying handbell students of all things, and Asia. I mean, the opportunities are just incredible.
So let's talk about listening skills and just this is a really important thing for an accompanist to do. So you can't just play your part. You have to have an awareness of what the other musicians are doing, which means that you usually, if you don't have like the full score, you've got to have a score that gives you enough information, but you have to watch, you have to listen, and and also be aware of their tempo. So the way I described this in college is still the way I describe it today is I'm a musical rodeo rider. It's like
I
the
don't know what that means.
oh, okay.
Please tell me.
Oh, okay. Sorry, it was maybe it's kind of growing up in the South, but I think of the person who's on the bull and trying not to fall off while the bull is like going up and down and
It gets
shifting side to
faster and
side,
faster.
and you're trying to stay on, it's not fall off, and so that's kind of the way I always envision accompanying, especially if someone uses a lot of rubato. It's like, okay, you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and I'm gonna try to stay with you, but I have to listen really closely for that. So, but that aside, yeah, talk about just listening skills from your perspective and, you know, what you're
Yeah,
experiencing for that.
listening is so, so important, like you said. And also going into a rehearsal, assuming you've gotten the music ahead of time, going in knowing what their part is going to sound like, whether that means listening to a recording ahead of time or at least looking at the score, seeing how the parts fit together. If they're playing, duples and you're playing triplets, it's good to know that before you go into the first rehearsal. Or listening to recordings so you can hear some of those rubatos that are kind of typically done. If it's a standard piece of repertoire, it can really be helpful. And then when you're in the rehearsal or performance, whatever the setting is, just always, always listening. I mean, I've heard pianists who, collaboration is not their specialty, and they'll be playing beautifully, but they're not with the person they're accompanying. They might be a beat or two ahead or behind, and it kind of ruins the experience if you're not together. And then there's the whole issue of balance as well, which we can talk a little about maybe. Knowing how to balance different instruments, knowing how to balance singers so that you're not overpowering them, but also so that they feel supported. You can't play so softly that they don't feel like there's anything underneath them. So that's kind of a skill that you have to get used to as well. And for me, the first step to good balance is using my ear. Now, there are certain instruments where it's a little tricky. Your ears kind of play tricks on you. But generally speaking, if you can hear the person playing or singing, most likely the audience will be able to hear them as well.
Yes. And if for some reason they can't, if someone's in the audience, they'll be happy to let you know.
That's true.
Um, so this leads in naturally to the dual roles that you have to follow, which is sometimes you're the leader, sometimes you're the follower. So this was something that I want to say was maybe about 12 or 13 years ago, that I was accompanying someone for a two-person show. It was a show about Billie Holiday and her pianist, and of course, guess which role I played? Uh, um,
Pianist.
yeah, yeah, I couldn't quite pull off Billie Holiday,
No.
um, but is the very talented singer playing Billie Holiday. And in the first rehearsal, I found myself listening to her rubato and trying to stay with her. And when she finally said, don't do that. Keep a steady beat and allow me to get off
Hmm.
the page of the written score and do my own thing. And in a jazz or pop style, especially jazz, that happens all the time. It's like there's this for a jazz vocalist, the written rhythm is more of a suggestion than it is the gospel. And so they're kind of relying on you to just keep it steady, and you have to turn off those instincts. And that's hard for me. I don't know about you, but it's hard for me not to follow them and just to be the metronome in that case. But in other cases, you of course you want the music to stick with what they're doing, and you want to follow them. So what's been your experience in as far as like being a leader versus a follower?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it really does depend on context, like you were saying. Um, for instance, if you're playing an orchestral reduction, if you think about how an orchestra would play, they're going to keep it more steady because they can't all follow the singer and do rubato together. So, in that sense, you're almost like the conductor and you're going to keep it more steady and they're going to do what they want to do kind of around that. If it's, a romantic vocal song or instrumental sonata or something, there's going to be a lot more give and take But it's funny because I actually was thinking of this question a little differently than what you just asked,
Hmm.
because you gave me some notes ahead of time. I was thinking more that there's certain scenarios with certain musicians where you have to be the leader because maybe they aren't leading. So I think back to when I was a staff pianist at a college. Those kids would come into rehearsal assuming that I was going to be the leader because I was the staff pianist. And I had to actually teach them how to be the leader, how to set the tempo, how to change the tempo, how to show me what they wanted. And it's a fine line because there are times as the pianist where you can kind of lead without them even really knowing that you're leading. You can be
Mhm.
kind of sneaky. Um, but yeah, it's interesting when you are the better musician or the older musician or whatever, and then you have to follow them because they're the soloist. But it feels a little like a role reversal, I guess. But you figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, that definitely does fit into my experience as well. I have had voice teachers say, David, don't let them drag.
Hmm.
Like keep the tempo moving and be yeah, especially because when I was in undergrad school, there were three voice teachers. One took only basically majors, voice majors, either theater voice majors or you know, basically very confident students. Then there was one that took a little bit of everybody, but then there was one teacher that kind of specialized in the non-music major voice students, the ones who wanted lessons, wanted a credit for it, but some of them had never sang at all and had never worked with an accompanist before. And yeah, that's very that's a different experience for them, and that requires you to come out and to be more of a leader. Let's talk about since we talked about a lot of things. We talked about playing actual piano music. We talked about orchestral reductions, and something that I can definitely speak on from experience are what are called piano conductor scores for musical theater. And some of these, if you're going to play it well, you've got to kind of alter the written score in order to play along. So, what are some of your tricks of the trade as far as deciding what to do and when to do it?
Yeah, I have found that this is the most surprising thing to classically trained pianists when they start accompanying is that they actually don't have to play all the notes. And it's it's a brain shift for them. They want to play everything on the page because that's how we were trained, that you had to do exactly what was on the page. And it depends again on the context, right? If it's an instrumental sonata that Brahms wrote and he put all those notes on the page, then you want to do your very best to play every note on the page. So the kind of the, I guess, litmus test is if it was originally written for piano, then you do your best to play exactly on what's on the page. But there are many things that we play as accompanists that weren't written for piano. They were written for orchestra or who knows what, and transcribed or arranged for piano. And then you are allowed to leave things out. So, as far as how to make those decisions, I find that listening to a recording is really important. And if you can listen to a recording of the original, so if it's an orchestral reduction, if you can listen to a recording of an orchestra playing it, then you can start making notes in the score of melody lines. And I even like to put little notes about what instrument is playing those different lines so that I can try and imitate the timbre of those different instruments. And then just really, really using your ear, listening to rhythmic things that need to come out. Also marking stuff out. So if there's something that you're like, I see that on the page, it looks important, but I don't hear it in the recording and it's going to slow me down or trip me up or whatever, then mark it out. And then also you can, I mean, we call it reducing the reduction, I guess. You can, if there's like things that are just really technically challenging for piano and are going to, again, trip you up or slow you down, you can reduce those down to make them simpler. Leave out octaves, or you can put something maybe in a different octave to make it a little easier. Something like that. It's fine, you know. This is a transcription. It's not the original. So feel free to alter accordingly, but you want to keep the big picture of what this orchestra sounds like.
And I forgot to mention, it's kind of similar to, we are talking about altering the music, but when you're sight reading, if you're in a situation where you're not quite ready to play both hands on the music, now feel free to disagree with this, but my default, unless I see something that tells me otherwise, is I prioritize the left hand because the bass line kind of informs, especially if it's a singer, it gives them the information they need a little bit more helpfully than if I did just the right hand.
Yeah, it depends again on the piece or the song, but I agree.
Mhm.
Usually left hand and then melody, or, whatever you can kind of manage beyond that. But keeping a strong rhythmic pulse and some bass is always a good start.
Right. And then I feel like I'm going back and chasing some other things. Also, as far as leading and following, I don't think that we really talked about. You mentioned balance.
Hmm.
Sometimes what the piano has is the important part, and the singer is, maybe if we're talking about singing, or the other instrument is resting.
Hmm.
And so this is a time to actually be the soloist and shine. Whereas a lot of other times you want to stay underneath, you want to be heard, but you want to not compete for attention. So,
Exactly. Yeah. And then you get the really fun ones where you do like a piano trio or quartet or even quintet, where you have all these different texture layers and they just kind of weave in and out with different people being important at different times. That's when it gets real fun.
I feel like that might be, in my opinion, one of the most fun things if you're a piano soloist. Certainly you want to get accompaniment experience, but um, just talking about like repertoire out there, like the things that you can find. There's so much great chamber music for that involves the piano. So trios, quartets, quintets, and one piece I've never played, but I would love to, is the piano sextet by Francis Poulenc, which is basically for woodwind quintet plus piano.
Mm.
It's a great, great piece. It starts off with like this thundering piano part at the very beginning, and octaves and scales and so forth. But yeah, I've got to find a woodwind quintet that wants to play it, and then get the
Yeah.
score and so forth. So oh yeah, one more thing before we talk about how to practice being an accompanist. Now, this is maybe a little more outdated than it would have been if we'd had this interview maybe 20 years ago. Because, now I've got things like this iPad right here with a thing called Fourscore and a butterfly um, pedal that I could do with my foot. But we're talking about page turns, and of course, um, it's quite possible that you might get someone to turn your pages. If you don't have it on an iPad, you've got the actual paper sheet music, you can sometimes get someone to turn your pages. But especially in rehearsal, you don't always get that. So,
Mhm.
how do you handle especially awkward page turns?
Good question. Well, first of all, the first thing I always tell my students is make sure that you get your music set up the way you want it before your first rehearsal, because oh, so frustrating. I've had students come in and their sheets are just like falling on the floor. They're out of order. I'm like, at least set yourself up for success. Put them in a notebook, tape them together, whatever you need to do. So that's step one. But then as far as page turns, um, honestly, again, you really want to prioritize the bass when think about turning with which hand is going to make more sense to turn with, and be adept at turning with both hands. Well, either hand, I guess, not both at the same time, either hand. And then, I mean, just you can be creative. Like you can photocopy pages and put them on the side. Sometimes I'll photocopy a couple of measures and tape it on the top of the next page. Like I've done all sorts of crazy things to make the page turns better. Sometimes if it's photocopied, like two-sided photocopies, you look and you'll say, actually, if the page turns were opposite, it would be better. So you can like recopy it so that the page turns, if they're like page 1, 3, and 5, you can make it so the page turns are 2, 4, and 6, and it's suddenly better. So, kind of my rule of thumb is I try and photocopy it the way it is in the book because usually they've thought about where the page turns make more sense. I don't know if that's helpful, but
Oh,
those are
yeah.
a few of my tricks.
Yeah, and there's a thing a lot of people use called an accordion fold, where you tape it in such a way that you can like put it together like a book and then fold it out. Kind of depends on your piano. It's like that's something that a grand piano is not very helpful because the stand folds out, and it's
Mhm.
sometimes you can squeeze 4 sheets on there. It's hard to do more than that. Whereas if you
Mhm.
have like one of those big, those console uprights, sometimes you can get 7, 8, 9 pages, straight across, and those are very helpful. I
Yeah, if you don't know what your piano is going to be like, I wouldn't recommend doing too many. You're right.
right. I played for a few years. I was an outside music director for a local school, and I would come in just for their fall show. And sometimes the students, for their audition, they would bring me music that they had photocopied, and it was single-sided.
Yeah, it's the worst.
Yep.
And then if they've cut off the bass line, you're really in trouble, right?
Oh yeah, that is true. Well, let's transition to talking about practicing. So, um, if you're having to practice your part outside of rehearsal, what are your thoughts on using a metronome? Obviously, you don't want to be locked. You can't be too locked in because the person you're accompanying might not be locked in. But on the other hand, as you said, you want your rhythm to be strong because if they are going steady, you want to go steady too. So how do you kind of balance the idea of practicing with a metronome or practicing without one?
Yeah, I think the metronome is one tool that I would use, depending on the piece again. If it's really rhythmic, I probably would use the metronome to practice it. Um, but I would also use a few other tools. One is, again, listening to recordings. Another one is, especially if it's a song for a singer, actually try singing their part while you're playing. I was actually coaching a pianist today. She lives in England, and we were doing a coaching over Zoom. And she was learning this accompaniment, and it was like eighth notes in the piano and then like a beat and a half of rest or something. And she was rushing through those rests every time. And I was like, you have to sing those three eighth notes that the singer has during your rests to get that feel, or at least feel them inside, like mentally sing it, but ideally sing it out loud. So, and who cares what octave or, if you're even singing the right notes, as long as you're getting the rhythm. But being able to think in your head or sing out loud the other part is, I think, really helpful. Occasionally, I'll even practice along with a recording, depending, like musical theater. I find that practicing with a recording can be really helpful to get the feel and the groove. Like if I'm going to be playing musical theater with a band, I'll play with a recording so I can get that really like feel of how it's going to feel and the what the groove's going to be.
Yeah, especially in musical theater, if it's a show that's been around a while and the cast is learning by listening to the recording, they're very sensitive if like the tempo is off at all.
Yeah.
So that is where I guess a metronome might come in handy. Just make sure that you've worked it up to that tempo and kind of and also hearing the metronome that tempo just once you figured out what it is, it's just you kind of get used to that. And sometimes on shows I have to put my metronome app on silent, but like just see it to make sure
Mhm.
that I'm on the right tempo before we do that. So. Um, what, so if someone has never accompanied before, how might they get started?
Well, I think that the first thing is that having a really strong solo piano foundation
Mhm.
is key. If you're a pianist who's still taking lessons and learning solo repertoire, like keep going because that's going to give you such a strong foundation musically, technically, everything. Like that's the first step. And then beyond that, I would say just, start saying yes when opportunities come along. If people find out you're a pianist, they're probably going to ask you to accompany something, whether it's a singer in church or a choir rehearsal, and start saying yes. And I mean, most of us kind of learned on the job. Like, yes, I eventually got degrees in collaborative piano, but that's not where I started. I mean, honestly, I started way back when I was in children's choir and the pianist was sick one day and they're like, "Oh, Rachel, do you want to play?" And I said, "Sure." And I plunked away. I guess I did okay. I don't know, but
Right.
just, don't be afraid to take the opportunities that come and, know your limits. Like if you've never done it before, maybe don't say yes to a full show right out of the gates. But if it's something that you feel like you could do well at and you have some time to prepare, then just try it and see how it goes.
Yeah, and I just wanted to offer when you're ready, at least from my experience, uh, when it comes to supply and demand, it's in your favor as an accompanist. There's always heavy demand, especially for someone who is experienced, So, um, but it just seems like I can't tell you how many times I have to say no to things, at this point, throughout the year of people who are looking for, piano services of some kind. So I made a little bit of a list, and certainly we can add to it. I'll give the list first, and we could maybe talk about them. Just some opportunities to practice your following skills, your accompanying skills. We have churches, we have school choruses, voice lessons, weddings, musical theater or opera, which is kind of two sides of the same coin, and dance. I was kind of thinking like ballet, but also like dance classes. And then,
Mhm.
and I'm sure there's some other things, but um, I, I guess when I think about like what could someone with maybe not as much experience do first, well, there's different size churches out there. So,
Mhm.
so I have looked at advertising. I'm currently music director slash pianist slash organist at a local church. But when I've looked at what jobs are available in the past, I've seen big churches, but I've also seen small churches that are, they're not paying that much. But if you're new, that might be something to consider, where you're just basically probably going to be asked to play out of a hymnal, which
Mhm.
is if you've never done it before, it's like some people will tell you that's really easy, but it's very different.
It
And
is different.
yeah,
I grew up in church playing out of the hymnal since I was like in third grade or something. So it feels so comfortable to me. And I'm surprised when pianists are like, this is so hard. But I can see where it would be because you really have to be able to read the chords and all of that.
yes. Um, and also recognizing that they're written in a way to be sung, and a lot of times there's a big gap between the bass and the tenor, but you'll find that it's actually closer to the soprano, so you can grab it with the right hand. And there's a
Mhm.
whole art to hymnal playing. So,
Yeah.
but the good news is once you get comfortable with playing a few hymns, you you can pretty much play just about all of them, out of the
Mhm.
same hymnal because it the it's pretty similar, in terms of the approach, when you're going
Mhm.
from one to another. So I guess I would think that perhaps that or accompanying voice lessons of maybe lesser experienced students, that might be a good first step. Or is there some other easier way that you could think of for accompanying?
I think those would be, yeah, really good first steps. Voice lessons, it kind of depends on the teacher if you're gonna go be accompanying every week. One of my first accompanying job, actually my first accompanying job out of college, I was playing voice lessons at the college that I had gone to, and I would go to the voice lessons every week, and I learned so much. I learned so much about vocal technique and about repertoire and about accompanying. I mean, it was really, really good training being in those voice lessons every week. Now, some teachers, they just want an accompanist to come in and play for the recital or whatever, and that's probably not as conducive to a new beginning accompanist.
Right. I was just looking at the list. So, accompanying dance lessons, this might be ideal for a pianist who's very secure in their rhythm because this is one where you don't do a lot of or as much rubato. It's more of a because in fact you'll probably hear the dance teacher 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and just keeping the time for you pretty much. It's almost like your metronome in the room. On the other hand, the music might be a little bit more difficult, and it's certainly a little bit more active. In this case, they really want to hear you because you are the sole music, but you're like an accompanist because you're not doing it as a soloist. You're not doing it to be heard. You're accompanying not another musician, but another artist. Another group
Hmm.
of artists. So, and I forgot to mention these are also professional opportunities. If you are an
Right.
accompanist in the list that I gave, churches, school courses, voice lessons, weddings, musical theater, opera, dance, these are opportunities to make some money, in some
Mm.
cases to actually have an actual job, a salary job, especially if you're a staff accompanist for a school or if you are at a church, that pays pretty well, and again, churches come in all sizes, so you have to kind of look for that. Um, Weddings is an interesting thing because I don't think that for most weddings that it requires, as much skill as some of the other things, but there's that pressure. You are playing for someone's special day, right?
Yeah, and pianists are always so terrified to play for weddings because they're like, I don't want to mess up their special day. And I always tell them, you know what? Nobody's thinking about you. When the bride's walking down the aisle, I mean, I suppose if you played a real clunker of a note, maybe a few people would notice, but they really aren't paying a whole lot of attention. And the nice thing about weddings is a lot of times you can choose the repertoire that you want to play for a good portion of it. They might have, a special song they want for the processional or the recessional or whatever. But as far as like prelude and things like that, a lot of times you get to choose so you can play stuff that you've know and that you're comfortable with.
Yes. Um, the one thing that I would now, yeah, school choruses. I mean, I would say that's kind of on a par of playing in a church. Depends
Hmm.
on the school, depends on how experienced the choir is. But I have to say, for just again from my experience, uh, playing for musical theater, I would not recommend that unless you feel very accomplished as, with your technical skills, because
Hmm.
you might get something pretty easy. Like there are some musicals out there that aren't that demanding, but there are plenty of musicals that are written um, with the understanding that the pianist is going to work quite a bit. And yeah, definitely. I would say I would work up to that. That's just my opinion as far as that goes.
Yeah, I would say so. And if you are interested in doing musical theater, but you're inexperienced, one of the things that I did in grad school is I played for kids musical theater, and that tends to be a little more accessible. Sometimes they'll be doing the shorter, like the junior shows, and a lot of times it's just piano, so there's no band. You don't have to like program the synthesizer and lead the band and all of the things that I'm sure you've done. I don't have a lot of that experience either, but some of the kids shows are a little more pianist friendly, I guess.
Yeah. And a lot of it has to do with this is something I found before. Um, Most composers, they don't really think I'm going to write an outrageously difficult vocal part, but keep the piano simple. And they also likewise don't think I'm going to write this for kids, make it easy to sing, and then put a concerto in the piano part. It's just like
Yeah.
not something's likely to happen. I guess it could, but yeah, you tend to have like if it's a difficult part for who you're accompanying, it's probably difficult for you, and
Mhm.
likewise, if it's easy for them, it's probably not that difficult for you. So that might be a good stereotype that you can sometimes count on. Well, let's talk about just some of the services you offer. So now one of the things that I'll mention, we just talked about these professional gigs. I have looked at your Instagram page and noticed that you do offer helping pianists with the business side of things, like how to, what your contract should look like, what your rate should be. So in addition to that, what kind of services do you offer and where can people find you?
Sure. So I offer coachings for pianists. If you have a gig coming up, like I was telling you about this woman today, she's playing for a voice festival coming up, and she was freaking out about the music she was given, and it was, she was struggling with it. And so we met, we talked through it, played through it, had her play some things. I gave her a bunch of tips to, simplify some of the orchestra parts and things like that. So I love doing that. I love working with pianists one on one over Zoom, or, I guess if you're in Southern California, we could do it in person, but most likely over Zoom. So that's one thing. And then I also have a digital course about accompanying for pianists who want to learn more. And it really, it's for pianists who, are, I would say, advanced level pianists or close to advanced level pianists, but who aren't confident in their accompanying skills. And so it really takes you from feeling insecure, not sure quite what you're doing, to feeling confident. And there's modules on vocal accompanying, choral accompanying, instrumental accompanying, playing for church, all these things we talked about, playing for weddings, funerals, church services, all of these different things. Um, if people are interested in the course, the best way to find out more about it, you can just like go to my website and find it. But I also have a free webinar. It's 29 minutes and it gives you some more tips about accompanying so you can kind of see my teaching style. And then at the end, it talks about the course and what's included in the course. So I can give you the link to the free webinar if people are interested in that. And then my website is just rachelehring.com, and that has all my different uh, freebies and products and all of that on there. I have a kind of new freebie. It's the collaborative pianist rate calculator. And so you can put in, because that's like the number one question pianists always have, what should I charge? So you can put in like location, how long the gig is, a few different variables, and then it'll give you a suggested rate to charge. So that's free on my website if you want to check that out. And then Instagram, it's also at Rachel Ehring. So.
Yes. And by the way, if you ever have that anxiety about when someone says how much are your services and you feel like I don't want them to think I'm charging too much, I just would encourage you go find out what photographers charge and what caterers charge, and you'll feel just fine what
It's
you're
true.
asking.
So true.
All right. Yeah. Feel free to send me that link and I'll put it in the show notes. So,
Great.
Rachel, thank you for taking time out this evening to chat with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
And that just about wraps up today's episode. If you enjoyed this episode, especially if you're watching on YouTube, I would love it if you click the thumbs up and feel free to leave me a comment either on the video itself or you can send me a message at davidlanemusic.com using the contact form that's right on the homepage. And as a reminder, if you'd like to tell me with your own voice some comments or even some questions you might have after hearing this episode, feel free to do that by going to the website speakpipe.com/musician toolkit. Also in the show notes, you will find Dr. Ehring's information and how you can work with her one-on-one and also see her free webinar and go to her website and find out more about who she is and the services that she has. And of course, you can follow her on Instagram at Rachel Ehring, one word. Again, that's going to wrap up today's episode, but I will be back with you again next week. Until then, thank you so much for listening.